And so I want to introduce you to the Glissons, and Megan is going to interview them, and they're going to share a little bit about how they used their gift and how, in fact, they got to the point in which they were able and willing to use their gift. And would you give a hand to Christian and Emily Glisson as they come to share their story before the message?
All right. Christian and Emily, it's great to have you. So like Pastor Dan was saying, we talk about sharing our time, our talent, and our treasure. And one of the values that we have here at North Central is generosity. So would you guys just share a little bit about how you give to your church?
Yeah, so all of those things are things I participate in. I'll let you kind of figure out which one I don't like as much as the other by telling you which one is my favorite first. One of the ways that I get to serve our church is through Kids Central, so teaching our kids about the good news of Jesus and the greatest story ever told. That's kind of the theme that we go through. We look at the entire Bible from start to finish of how it points to Jesus, and that's a thrill for me. I grew up in a church where I was a part of kids programming, and there were some teachers who were not as talented as other teachers, and so for me that inspires me to want to make it engaging, and I've learned some things maybe not to do from that experience, and also believe that God has given me some natural giftedness in that area, which I'm so thankful to share, not just because it is fulfilling for me, but also because I know how important that time in my life was, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of that. So time and talent, maybe a mixture of those, and then the third one might be a little harder for me.
Hi, everybody. How do I give? I give to my church through financially. I give money when there's special offerings. I ask God, what can I give here? The capital campaign we had, a lot of you may remember, for the kids space, and that's still something that asking God to lead and how I can give, because it's still something that he has financial needs. And then as far as time and talent, I've served in Kids Central Junior, so the nursery, the babies, since we became members here, which was 2015 or so, 2016. And then I've also been serving on the board, the deacon trustee board here, since about April. So those are some of the ways that I give to North Central.
Yeah, especially as a parent who, I have teenagers now, but who have had children that have come through our Kids Central ministries. The workers, you guys, teachers, have played such a vital role in helping us disciple our kids. So we really do appreciate when you give of your time to love and serve our kids here, for sure. So the next question is why? Why do you give?
Yeah, so kind of going back to maybe the one that's more difficult to fulfill for me, I kind of want to touch on that a little bit, because I do participate maybe with a little bit less joy at first, but maybe there's a common theme here. But as a kid, I remember that was back in the day when checks were written, and that's become less and less of a thing these days. And I know I've talked to other parents too who are like, man, I learned how to give to church because I remember my parents sitting down and writing out a check and seeing that physically. But that was a big part of it for me. I remember every Sunday my dad would give, and being Snoopy like I was, I would look at the amount, and I thought, man, that's a lot of money to give to the church. Why would you do that? And so I saw early on what it looked like to give, and my parents were very good at helping me understand why they gave. And so for me, that kind of triggered the why. It was always, this is something that we do because the church is God's primary vehicle for evangelism. There's no plan B. The church is the means by which God has helped us to participate, and there's no other option that he's given, so it's important. And that really helped me to see my parents struggle financially but still give, and also to see how he always provided, how God always provided for my family, despite there being times where I knew that my parents were pretty stressed over their finances. Much of my childhood, we were below the line of poverty, and we were receiving assistance through programs, and yet every week my dad was writing out that check, and that left a big impression for me on why to give. I learned from my parents, and then got to experience that as they maybe forced me to give on some of the birthday money and things that I had, which really helped me to see that it wasn't maybe as bad as I thought it was, as you start to experience what God does in your own heart after you give.
Yeah, I have 2 points for why I give, and what Christian just talked about, similar to that. I was taught to from a young age, so I remember being in church and that dark red velvet offering basket goes by, and my dad would give me give me cash to put in there. We didn't do checks. My dad doesn't trust banks, so it was always cash, and so I got to, he'd let me do it, and so I would kind of feel it in my hand, and then I'd put it in the basket and watch it go and watch everybody else do it. So from a young age, I was taught that we go to our church so that our church can do what it needs to do. And the second reason is because God instructs us to very clearly. And of all the examples from God of his generosity, the gospel story is a generosity story from the beginning till the end. And even the verse everybody knows, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave. God gave us creation. He gave us the Bible to guide us. He gives us people around us. He gives us his wisdom, his care, every moment. And he didn't even spare his only son from us. What more of an example do I need? So when I find myself, let's see, it's, thinking how it's a complex thing. It's not. It's just give as much as you can. I listened to a pastor speak about generosity a couple years ago, and I still remember the verse that he spoke from. And the point he made was, the purpose of my money is generosity, which is very opposite of what people think. And he used Ephesians 4:28, which says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may, and then he said, so that he may what? Think in your head what the rest of the verse says. And so I'm thinking, oh yeah, he was a thief. So let him do honest work so he can make an honest living and support himself and his family. That makes sense to me. But the verse ends, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. That's the purpose. It's not for me to say, all right, let's divvy this up for myself. It's how can I give? And that really hit me pretty good, because that's just not my first inkling when I'm having an income or having something to meet my needs. It shouldn't be my first thought. But it just kind of made me think giving goes hand in hand with following Christ. As our story is woven in with God's, generosity is in there. And if I'm not being generous, then I'm not woven in. I'm just a thread flapping in the breeze. So if I'm not doing that, then what am I doing? I'm not living out the part of that story that is embedded in being a follower of Christ. So that was one of the biggest reasons why I give.
Pastor Dan just was having a sermon series about being like Jesus, right? And one of those values that we have here, like you just said, is generosity, and that's us living like Jesus, who gave, like you said in John 3:16. So my last question is, how has your giving impacted your lives? You touched on that a little bit, but if you can share a little bit more with us.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think I've self-servingly investigated on my own is, how can I have an impact on those around me that are far from Jesus? And one of the verses that was really important to me in understanding how God views his plan for us is the verse that talks about how they will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. And so we show our love with our time, talent, and our treasure. We know that our heart is so closely attached to our wallet. It's so closely attached to where we spend our time. If we kind of break it down, we see what we actually care about, what we spend our money on. And one of the things that I've noticed as I've gotten older and, my giving wasn't maybe forced by my parents, it was on my own, I've noticed that there is a truth that has stuck with me and has been so rewarding to be a part of. There's a common misconception and a common preaching that if you give more, God will multiply what you've given and give it back to you, that you will be wealthier as a result of your giving. And I have discovered that that's not actually true. And that can be maybe discouraging at first and scary, like, oh, well, maybe let's pause the giving here. But what I've noticed all along as God has been with me through it, I've noticed that when I give more, I may not have more. In fact, I've noticed some of the times I've been most generous and maybe stuck with that principle of a 10%, of your earnings going to church or giving, that those may have actually been some of the hardest times financially for our family. And it's easy to think, oh, well, I thought this was supposed to be multiplied. Like, what's going on here? God, didn't you see the, giving that we gave here? And what he's taught me as we've given is, I'm not here to pad your bank account. I'm here to help you see who I am. And our hearts are aligned with God's when we give, because our hearts are immediately aligned with what he's doing. And it's easy to get caught up in, I don't really love the way that my church is giving. It feels like we're upgrading our building all the time. I wouldn't do this with my own finances, or, they don't get the right tissues, or, whatever, right? Like, it can get really out of hand in our own minds. And God says, give faithfully, and I will help you understand my heart as you go. And that's really the joy of giving.
Yeah, I have learned two things throughout my life in my giving. The first is my giving will change over time, and it needs frequent reassessment. So, if I'm comfortable with a number that I'm giving all the time, and I'm not reassessing that because life changes so much, it needs to be something that I'm talking to God about all the time. About a year ago, I stopped working full-time I've worked full-time since I was like 16. So it was a big change for me. And I always had my own income to give from. And now I work very little, so I still have a little something. But it's been kind of more of a family affair, whereas before I just kind of did my tithe, and I didn't really talk to you about it. But now it's been, how can I give, God, when things are different for me? And because I'm not working as much, I have more time and energy to give to my church in the other ways with my talents and my time. So that's been a transition for me over the past year, but I've also learned I need to be asking God about this a lot, not just once every 5 years, or whatever it was before. And the second thing that I've learned is I can give no matter where I am at in my life, financially, physically, mentally. I can always give something. So I'll end with this story that occurred at the ripe old age of 21. So this story is when I'm almost done with nursing school. We're about to get married in 6 months. So my stress levels have never been higher in my life. And there was a handful of things for our wedding that we wanted to pay for on our own. It was really important to us that we wanted to do that. And, I'm a broke college student. I don't have any money. But we were making it work. And I just remember there was a deposit due for something, photographer or music or something for our wedding. And I was like, okay, I got to get this together because it's going to be due at this time. And I just remember being so stressed about it and thinking, how am I going to do this? How are we going to get this cash together? It was $650. I remember the amount because the amount is important later. So I remember just thinking to myself, you know what, I think maybe I'll pause my giving at my church for a little bit to just get this paid for, and then I'll jump right back in. You know, that seems reasonable. I just explained to myself. And the next day, didn't sleep well that night. All the next day, I'm just not feeling right with what I had decided. And I remember I'm sitting in my class, my nursing school class. I'm not paying attention at all to the teacher. I'm doodling. I'm like writing down numbers. I'm doing math, like financial math, not nursing school math. And, next thing I know, I think to myself, oh, it's really quiet in here. And I look up and everyone's gone. Like the whole class, I didn't pay attention. I just was focusing on this and anxious about it and worried. And so at that moment, I was like, there's something wrong with me. I can't even pay attention. I can't function. This is not right. And so I remember right then and there in my class by myself, I prayed and I said, God, I'm sorry that I came to this conclusion. It's not right. I've been convicted about it for 24 hours, and I'm going to keep giving, and I will find a way. Like, you will provide, and we'll find a way to pay for this. And so I leave the class, and I thought I'd stop by my student mailbox. Hadn't checked it in a little while. They gave you papers and stuff in there. I go to the mailbox. I open it up, and there's a check in there in my name for $650. And I was like, and it's from the school. So I go to the main office. I'm like, what is this for? Like, where'd this come from? And they said, oh, that's financial aid from the beginning of the semester that you were not paid, and we just had calculated it. And I was like, so what can I do with this? Like, do I have to buy books? She was like, I don't know. Do whatever you want with it. Merry Christmas. Like, just get out of my office. And so I walked out with this check, and I'm like, God, thank you. You provided right at that time that I had recommitted my giving back to you, and you gave me this. And it was just the amount I needed to the dollar. And I won't ever forget that story. So overall, I think what I've learned from that is God makes his invisible generosity visible through us. God uses other people when I'm in need. God's used me when other people are in need. God will provide. It might not be padding the bank account, like Christian said. It might not be multiplying it and you're so prosperous because you're giving to God, but he's going to meet your needs and more usually. So not being afraid to be generous, not being afraid for myself, I think is the biggest thing. You know, when you have kids, it's a whole other group of people you're taking care of, but I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to worry. God is so good. And he's so faithful. And so that's one of the biggest things I've learned through my giving story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's in a lot of those times when we're kind of desperate and we are in need. And I mean, that was for your wedding, which was really important. But sometimes it's our mortgage, it's our, water bill, it's our lights. We need our lights on. There's different things we get into different places at different times in our lives. It's we had a child and we need a meal, things like that. And it is amazing how in those desperate times, how God shows himself so much more to us. And he especially shows himself faithful. And while, I think we could also agree that we've had times in our lives the same way, and I wouldn't want to, really go through those things again. Boy, are we glad that we've been through them, because that's how we've really seen, like you said, the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God. He's shown us that through those particular things that we've gone through. So thanks for being faithful in your giving. And if you want to learn more about North Central and the values that we have here, one of them being generosity, you can always go to the Roots class. I know it's on our website. You could check that out too. But I'm so thankful that no matter where we are in our walk with Christ, that we have believers that we're doing this life with that we can learn and grow from. And Team Glisson, we're really, really thankful for you. So thanks for doing this. And can we give them one more applause?